A single dad janitor outran 100 experts. But what the CEO saw in him changed her life forever. The screech came at 2:13 a.m. Sharp, metallic, wrong. Tom Walker dropped his mop and froze. The sound had sliced through the humming silence of the night shift like a cry for help. He turned slowly toward the source, the Delta 9 assembly arm, the pride of future mech robotics, a sleek giant capable of constructing a full industrial robot in under 4 minutes. It was shuddering. He stepped closer. His boots echoed on the concrete floor, the only sound besides the low, rhythmic clank of machinery. "Not now," he muttered. "Don't you fall apart on me now." Tom crouched beside the machine and placed a hand gently on its casing, like calming a skittish horse. He pressed his ear closer. There. A soft stutter in the pressure release valve, barely audible to anyone who wasn't used to listening to machines like they were breathing creatures. "Your lungs are clogged," he whispered almost instinctively. With a glance around the empty floor, Tom reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small notepad creased oil-stained sacred. He jotted down a few numbers, then opened the side panel of the Delta 9 unit. His fingers moved quickly, adjusting a few tension bolts and realigning the internal valve that controlled airflow to the cooling chamber. It took less than 3 minutes. Just as he was screwing the panel shut, a voice sliced through the air like a whip. "What the hell are you doing?" Tom stood slowly. Kara Simmons stood across from him, arms crossed, heels clicking as she strode forward. Her badge caught the overhead light lead systems engineer. "I heard something," Tom said calmly. "A pressure stutter in the Delta 9. "It was about to your job is to hear mop buckets," she snapped. "Not machines that cost more than your house." Tom didn't flinch. "Ma'am, I've worked with pneumatic systems all my life. This valve was off by don't ma'am me," she interrupted, jaw clenched. "You touch anything in this line again, I'll have your badge revoked." "Understood." Tom held her gaze, not defiant, just steady. "Understood." Kara turned and stormed off, muttering something about janitors and boundaries. Behind her, Delta 9 stood silent. Smooth, stable. Tom didn't smile. He just tucked the notepad back into his pocket and walked away, mop in hand. At 7:00 a.m., the explosion wasn't dramatic, but it was expensive. A hydraulic burst on the Delta 9 line sent a cloud of synthetic coolant 30 feet into the air, coating the surrounding workstations. The machine shut itself down in a flurry of warning lights. Production halted. By 7:20, Tom was sitting in the locker room sipping lukewarm coffee from a plastic thermos. He could hear the yelling through the walls. "How the hell did this happen? That line just passed inspection. I told you it was running hot all week." Tom closed his eyes. He knew what was coming next. The door slammed open. It wasn't Kara, it was Marcus Doyle, the newly appointed CEO. Younger than most, expected suited like a Wall Street shark, but with the stare of a man raised on Detroit steel. "You," Marcus said, pointing at Tom. Tom stood slowly. "Yes, sir. You touched the Delta 9 last night, yes, sir. You documented the issue." "Yes. In my notebook. You're not on the maintenance team. You don't have clearance." "No, sir." Marcus walked up close. "Then why the hell did you touch a $20 million unit because it was about to fail?" There was silence, a sharp one, heavy with judgment. Marcus blinked once. "You a technician?" "Used to be. In the Army, Mechanical Systems Division." More silence. Then Kara appeared behind Marcus' voice laced with venom. "Sir, with all due respect, we can't have janitors tampering with production lines. If something had gone wrong, it did go wrong," Marcus snapped, "and your team missed it." She shut her mouth. Tom stepped forward, slowly pulled the notepad from his pocket and handed it to Marcus. Logged everything. Time-stamped. Pressure readings. I knew the valve would give out if it wasn't recalibrated. Marcus flipped through the pages. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He wasn't looking at a janitor anymore. "Go home, Mr. Walker. You're off the clock," he said. Tom gave a small nod. "Understood." As Tom left, Kara turned to Marcus, seething. "You can't possibly think he predicted it. You didn't." "She got the job because she's loud in meetings," Tom murmured under his breath as he walked down the hall alone. "I used to think you needed a title to matter. Turns out all you need is to see the problem before it explodes." That night, Tom sat on the edge of his daughter's bed. Emily, 12, curly-haired, wearing oversized glasses and building a Lego robot on her nightstand. "You look tired," she said. "Long day." "Did the robot break again?" "Yep." "Did you fix it?" "Nope." She looked up. "Why not? Because they don't trust janitors?" She paused. "But you're not just a janitor." Tom smiled gently. "To them, I am." Emily got up, went to her desk, tore a page out of her sketchbook, and handed it to him. It was a drawing of a man in overalls standing next to a giant robot holding a wrench like a sword. She pointed at the man. "That's you." Tom looked at the drawing for a long time. "You think I'm some kind of hero?" "No," Emily said. "I think you're the kind of person who fixes things, even when nobody's watching." He didn't reply. He just tucked the drawing next to his notepad. And for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. The sound of squealing tires outside FutureMech's loading dock echoed into the chilled Michigan air. It was just past 9 a.m. when the white van rolled up marked with the logo of Mechatronics Global Solutions, the European consultancy group Kara had hired. Tom wasn't there to see it. He was home wiping engine grease off his hands after fixing the water heater again. The old house had its quirks, and Tom had learned long ago that fixing broken things, no matter the scale, was just part of life. He had the kind of hands that made things work even when people didn't. Inside the glass conference room, the mechatronics team stood, tall, sharp suits and clipped accents. Kara Simmons' arms folded introduced them with visible pride. "This is Peter Alvarez, Lead Systems Integrator. He'll be diagnosing the Delta 9 issue." Marcus sat at the head of the table, eyes unreadable. "You have 72 hours, he said. "After that, Tesla pulls the contract." Peter smiled confidently. 3 days. We'll need 2. Across the room, a junior engineer named Lyle shifted uncomfortably. His hands fidgeted with the corner of a report. He had been with the company for just over a year, quiet, methodical, often overlooked. After the meeting broke, Lyle caught up to Kara near the elevator. "Hey, about yesterday." She didn't slow her pace. "Yes, the janitor, Tom. He mentioned that the valve calibration was off before it failed." Kara turned crisp and cold. "And, well, he wasn't wrong. I checked the logs. Pressure variances started about 6 hours before the burst." Kara narrowed her eyes. "You're suggesting I should have listened to a janitor?" No, Lyle stammered, then added quietly. "Just that. Maybe he saw something we missed." She stared at him for a moment, then stepped closer. "Listen, Lyle. This company doesn't run on gut feelings and tool belt wisdom. It runs on protocols, certifications, data." Lyle looked down. "Let this be your first real lesson in corporate engineering," she said, voice low but sharp. "Never bet your career on a man who pushes a mop." And with that, she walked away. Meanwhile, Tom stood in line at the neighborhood grocery store, Emily beside him, holding a bag of dried pasta and a $2 notebook. She had been writing blueprints of her dream robot, a helper that could do chores and tell bedtime stories. "Dad," she said, "if the machine exploded because of something you saw, why didn't they listen?" Tom exhaled, hands in his pockets. "Because people don't hear what doesn't come from someone wearing a tie," he said. Emily frowned. "That's dumb." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. Back home, she curled up on the living room carpet, drawing again. Tom watched her for a moment, then walked into the garage. It still smelled faintly of motor oil and winter steel. Against the far wall, covered in a canvas sheet, was his Army service trunk. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were journals, manuals, a framed photo of a younger, Tom clean-shaven confidant standing next to a vehicle he had re-engineered in Afghanistan to withstand IED shockwaves. His team had nicknamed him Ghost because of how silently and swiftly he solved mechanical problems no one else could see. But that felt like another life. He sat down on the bench, fingers brushing the edge of the trunk, and whispered, "Do ghosts get second chances?" Back at Future Mech, things were anything but silent. Peter's team had spent the day adjusting the Delta 9's firmware and recalibrating the torque thresholds. But during the test run, the machine stuttered again just for a second, but enough to trigger an error code. "Reset the loop," Peter muttered. "The logic table's off." In the control room, Kara watched the data scroll. The numbers looked familiar. She opened a side file, the machine's historical log. Buried in a report from months ago, she found a note attached to an internal update. Valve, tolerance degrading, recommend manual override until part replacement. The name attached to the comment, Thomas Walker. Kara stiffened. When did he? At lunch, Lyle sat alone in the break room until an older floor supervisor, Janice, sat beside him. "You look like you swallowed a wrench," she said. I don't get it. Why bring in people from Europe when we've got folks here who actually know these machines?" Janice took a long sip from her thermos. "Honey, that's been the question since I started here in '89. She leaned in. "You know that janitor you're thinking about, Tom. When the old prototype failed 4 years ago, he was the one who told engineering to replace the thermal housing. They ignored him. Machine caught fire a week later." Lyle blinked, and they still didn't promote him. They called it luck. She stood to leave, then added over her shoulder, "Funny thing about luck, it keeps showing up for people who know what they're doing." That evening, as the factory lights dimmed, Marcus sat alone in his office, rereading Tom's notes. Pages of precise sketches, pressure diagrams, airflow metrics, and something else, a hand-drawn cross-section of the Delta 9 arm, with a red circle around a junction point no one had touched. Beside it, in Tom's neat block letters, "Failure begins here." Misdiagnose this, and it all falls apart. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed. "Security, get me a contact number for Thomas Walker. Tell him the CEO wants a word." Across town, Tom stepped out onto the porch, the night cool against his skin. He looked up at the stars. Emily joined him, hugging her sketchbook. "Dad?" She asked, "What's it like to know something and have everyone ignore you?" He smiled sadly. "It's like being the only one who hears the train coming and watching everyone build a picnic on the tracks." Emily looked up at him. "Then don't stop yelling," she said, "even if they cover their ears." Tom looked at his daughter, then at the phone buzzing in his pocket, then back at the stars. For the first time in a long while, something stirred in him. Maybe ghosts did get second chances, but only if they were willing to haunt a little louder. The next morning, a fresh layer of frost clung to the windows of Future Mech's headquarters. Inside the boardroom, tension hung heavier than the winter air. Marcus Doyle stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand. "We're down 42% in output. Tesla's threatening to reroute the contract to Singapore. And you're telling me the Delta 9 line still isn't fixed." Peter Alvarez cleared his throat, his German-accented English suddenly less confident. "We've reset the entire system. Twice. It's not the software. Something deeper is off in the mechanical alignment." Marcus dropped the marker onto the table. "Then fix the damn alignment." "We're trying," Peter said, adjusting his glasses. Kara glanced at the door where her assistant lingered nervously. "What? Sorry, Ms. Simmons," the assistant whispered. "Mr. Doyle requested I give him this." She handed over a thick manila folder. Marcus opened it. Inside were 24 pages of reports, diagrams, and handwritten notes, all from Tom Walker. "This came from Tom," Kara said, almost spitting the name. Marcus didn't answer. He just slid the top page across the table. Read it. Kara scanned it. After a moment, her eyebrows twitched. Peter leaned over. "What's that diagram?" An airflow remap, she said quietly, of the Delta 9 cooling chamber. He's suggesting the secondary vent is redirecting heat back into the pressure valve loop. That's ridiculous, Peter said. If that were true, the system would overheat. It did overheat, Marcus said. Twice. Peter frowned. But we tested the vent flow. It passed. Marcus looked directly at Kara. When did this janitor write this? She hesitated. He made similar notes before the explosion. I dismissed them. Peter leaned back, arms crossed. Perhaps you dismissed the wrong man. The room fell into a heavy, guilty silence. That same afternoon, Tom arrived outside the factory gates not in a truck, not in a suit, but on a bicycle, bundled in a coat too thin for the cold. Security waved him through before he even showed his ID. Marcus was waiting inside. Thanks for coming, Marcus said, extending a hand. Tom shook it without hesitation. You said you wanted help. I don't care if you wear a mop belt or a lab coat, Marcus said. You're the only one who saw this coming. So here's the deal. I'll give you full access to the Delta 9 diagnostics. You show me what everyone else missed. Tom nodded once. I don't need access. Marcus blinked. What do you mean? Tom reached into his coat, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and laid it on the table. This is what they missed, he said, and I wrote it 3 weeks ago. It was a precise diagram of the Delta 9's exhaust chamber airflow directions and a bold red arrow pointing to one junction. If you don't bypass this and reroute heat out through the auxiliary path, Tom said calmly, your whole system will keep melting from the inside. Marcus stared at the diagram. Then, why didn't anyone see this? Tom looked at him for a long moment. Because sometimes people don't look unless the right title is on the report. In the adjacent corridor, Kara stood listening out of sight. Her pride screamed to storm in, but something else stopped her. A line from her mentor at MIT came back uninvited. Arrogance is the enemy of mastery. She clenched her jaw. So what if he was right? That doesn't make him better. Still, she couldn't shake the voice in her head. Emily's words from days earlier relayed by a floor tech. My dad hears machines like they're talking to him. Kara turned and walked away. By 4:00 p.m., the testing bay was cleared. Engineers lined the glass perimeter murmuring. Tom, in his gray coveralls, stood alone with the Delta 9 unit. He ran his hands gently along its side, then crouched to open a side panel. I've worked on military drones that whined less than you, he whispered to the machine. He started adjusting with simple tools, no laptop, no diagnostic pad. Just his fingers, a wrench, and instinct. It wasn't science fiction. It was science remembered. Muscle memory honed by years in the shadows. Peter Alvarez watched through the glass. He's recalibrating by ear, he said, stunned. Kara folded her arms tightly. No, he's recalibrating by feel. Someone in the room muttered, that's not in the manuals. And someone else replied, exactly. In less than 40 minutes, Tom stood and looked toward the control booth. Run the test, he said simply. Marcus nodded to the tech. A button pressed. Lights blinked, motors hummed. The Delta 9 arm moved. Smooth, clean, seamless. No stutter, no overheating, no error. The room was silent. Then applause, from engineers, from janitors, from interns who had watched for months as professionals failed. And now an invisible man had brought the machine back to life. Kara stayed silent. She couldn't clap. Not yet. But she stepped forward slowly until she stood beside Tom. I was wrong, she said. He didn't look at her, just nodded. I read your old notes, she added. You saw it long before any of us did. Tom finally turned to her. Seeing's the easy part, he said softly. Getting people to look, that's the real battle. Kara swallowed. I learned something today. Tom met her eyes. Then it was worth it. She paused. Then almost like a confession. You don't belong behind a mop. Tom smiled faintly. That's the thing. I never did. I just couldn't afford to prove it. That night, Marcus called an emergency board meeting. This man, he said, pointing to a slide of Tom adjusting the Delta 9, saved a $40 million contract with nothing but a wrench and intuition. One board member leaned forward. Is he certified? No, Marcus said. He's qualified. There was a beat of silence. Make him lead advisor, someone said. Now. Back at home, Tom tucked Emily into bed. She was already half asleep. Did they believe you today? She murmured. Tom brushed her hair back gently. They saw what they needed to see. Emily smiled. Told you you're not invisible. He kissed her forehead, then walked to his desk, opened his notebook, and started writing again. Not because someone finally asked him to, but because he finally knew someone was listening. The call came at 5:17 a.m. Marcus Doyle sat up in bed, heart racing, the ringtone shrill in the gray silence of dawn. He reached for the phone, eyes barely open. Yeah, sir, said the voice on the other end. Delta 9's arm just stalled. And the auxiliary line. It's down, too. The new calibration worked, but now another unit's triggering false shutdowns across the whole floor. Marcus rubbed his eyes. Shut it down. Tell no one. I'll be there in 30. Inside the control room, red error logs flashed like warning sirens on every monitor. Engineers stared in disbelief. Everything had worked yesterday. Everything. Kara Simmons paced near the main board face, pale coffee untouched. Peter Alvarez stood nearby, arms folded, silent. It's not the alignment, Kara muttered. Tom's fix held. I checked it myself. Then what the hell's happening? Said Lyle, the junior engineer voice tight with panic. Kara pointed at the screen. The fail-safes are tripping too early. The system thinks there's an overheating risk when there isn't. It's an input interpretation bug. Or, Peter added dryly, it's a system finally realizing it's run by amateurs. Kara shot him a glare. You've had 3 weeks, Peter. Don't lecture me now. You're the one who ignored the janitor. And you're the one who couldn't even read his damn notes. Enough, Marcus barked as he entered the room. The tension froze. He walked past the engineers straight to the panel and stared at the log. Where's Tom? Kara hesitated. He's off shift. Marcus turned to her sharp, then put him on shift. Now. Tom stood in the garage, hands black with oil, hunched over a half-repaired go-kart that Emily had begged him to build 2 summers ago. The project had stalled like everything else in his life until recently. He heard the car pull up outside before the knock came. He wiped his hands on a rag and opened the door. Kara stood there, hair-frizzed, coat-zipped halfway, eyes dark from no sleep. We need you. Tom looked past her to the car. Let me guess. Delta's down again. Worse, the entire floor is glitching. Tom nodded slowly. You sure you want advice from someone who pushes a mop? Kara didn't flinch. You're the only person I've met who listens to machines like they're trying to tell the truth. He held her gaze for a long beat. Then quietly, let me grab my coat. Back at the plant, chaos simmered just under the surface. Production had halted. Phones rang off the hook. Orders delayed. Stockholders calling. Tom entered with quiet purpose. No fanfare. Just a battered thermos in one hand and his notebook in the other. He stepped up to the screen. Red everywhere. He asked just one question. Did you swap out the temp sensor relay? Everyone looked confused. Peter frowned. The what? Tom flipped to a page in his notebook. The relay unit that translates thermal feedback to the central processor. It's been known to corrupt data if paired with 3rd-gen firmware. This plant uses 2nd-gen hardware. Peter blinked. That's not in the official tech bulletin. Tom looked at him calm. Because no one tests these things in the field anymore. They just simulate them and call it done. Peter opened his mouth, then closed it. Marcus leaned forward. Can you fix it? Tom nodded. I need 20 minutes and a clean floor. You'll have 30, Marcus said, and the floor is yours. As Tom worked, the engineers gathered behind the glass once again, just like the day before. But today, something had changed. They weren't watching to scoff. They were watching to learn. He moved with quiet confidence, fingers tracing the lines of circuitry like reading Braille. He unscrewed a panel, removed the relay chip, and replaced it with one from a nearby shelf, one labeled obsolete. Ironic, he murmured how the obsolete part is the only one that works. Kara, standing behind him now, heard every word. She said softly, "That makes two of you." Tom smiled without turning around. "I've been called worse." The machines rebooted. Lights flickered once, then stabilized. Tom pressed the start command. This time the entire line powered on, not just Delta 9, but every arm, every conveyor, every auxiliary robot. Like a symphony that had finally found its conductor. Flawless. Marcus exhaled. So did Kara. Even Peter clapped once, begrudging but genuine. Tom stepped back and looked at the team. "You weren't failing because your machines were broken," he said quietly. "You were failing because you stopped listening to them. Machines aren't just code, they're behavior, they're memory." He looked at Kara. "And sometimes they remember how they were built better than we do." Lyle stepped forward, voice hesitant. "Mr. Walker, would you ever teach us?" Tom paused. Then, "Only if you promise not to call me Mr. Walker." "I'm Tom." That evening, in a quiet corner of the plant cafeteria, Marcus sat with Kara, both nursing lukewarm coffee. "He's the real deal," Marcus said. Kara nodded slowly. "I underestimated him. I was too busy proving I belonged to realize I stopped learning." Marcus leaned forward. "You're sharp, ambitious, but you forgot the one thing that makes a good engineer great." "What's that?" "Humility." Kara stared into her cup. "You think he'll take the promotion?" "He doesn't want a title," Marcus said. "He wants to be useful." Kara smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what we should all want." At home, Tom sat in the living room, Emily curled up next to him watching cartoons. The fire crackled gently in the hearth. "Dad," she said, "do you think people can change?" Tom looked down at her. "I think people don't change," he said. "I think they wake up." Emily looked up. "You woke up?" Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "No." He whispered. "The world did." And in that moment, beneath the softness of her hair and the warmth of the fire, Tom realized this wasn't just a redemption arc. It was the beginning of something bigger, something louder, something that would no longer go unseen. The next morning, the halcyon room buzzed with voices Tom Walker wasn't supposed to hear. It was a space reserved for innovation teams' executive briefings and corporate war rooms with chrome coffee makers and brushed steel chairs. Everyone who entered wore lanyards that shimmered under LED lights. Everyone except Tom. He stood outside, mop in hand, watching through the glass as 30 executives filed in. "Private session," said a young intern as she passed, not unkindly, just repeating the rule like a recording. "Badge access only." Tom gave a nod and stepped aside. He wasn't offended. He was used to it. But he couldn't help notice the irony. 3 days ago, they wouldn't restart a machine without him. Now they wouldn't open a door. Inside, Marcus stood at the head of the long table, a blueprint of the new modular robotics line stretched before him. "This redesign isn't just about damage control," he said. "It's our future. We deliver this and we beat Shanghai, Berlin, and Austin to market." A woman from corporate strategy raised her hand. "Who's leading technical design?" Marcus paused. "Kara will oversee engineering, but I want input from the floor." "Floor?" Peter echoed, frowning. Marcus turned toward Kara, who sat quietly. "I want Tom in the room," Marcus added. "On every draft, every prototype. We move forward with the guy who saved our skin." Peter shifted uncomfortably. "No offense, but he doesn't even have a degree." Kara didn't lift her eyes. "And yet he's the only one who solved what none of us could." Another exec chimed in. How's that going to look to the board? Marcus leaned in. It's going to look like we finally stopped choosing titles over talent. Later that day, Tom walked into the break room to find Lyle nervously tinkering with a demo unit. Trying to get the sensors to sync again, Tom asked, taking a sip of weak coffee. Lyle glanced up. Yeah, I'm using a library file, but it keeps looping. Tom stepped closer, watched for a few seconds, then gently reached over and disabled the internal delay function. The screen blinked once, then settled. Lyle's mouth dropped. That's it. That fixed it. Tom nodded. Sometimes machines get scared of their own thoughts. You just got to tell them when to breathe. Lyle chuckled. Man, you're like a robot whisperer. Tom smiled. No, just someone who's been ignored by enough systems to know how they think. That afternoon, Kara approached him in the diagnostics bay. I need you in the halcyon room, she said quietly. Tom wiped his hands, still halfway through adjusting a Torquio plate. Pretty sure that room doesn't allow janitor boots. Kara met his gaze. I pushed for this, and Marcus backed it. You belong at the table, Tom. He looked at her for a long moment. What changed? She hesitated, then said, I did. The room went silent when Tom entered. No badge, no suit, just a flannel shirt, rolled sleeves, and a notebook so worn its spine had peeled back. He took a seat at the far end. For the first few minutes he didn't say a word. He just listened. Schematic after schematic, each more ambitious than the last. Kara's team presented the new ARM prototype, a streamlined modular design with AI-assisted precision. It looked beautiful. But Tom saw the fault before they even got to slide 7. The weight distribution's off, he said calmly. Everyone turned. Tom stood and walked to the board. The wrist actuator you're proposing. He pointed. You've doubled its load capacity but kept the same housing geometry. That stress will warp within 6 months. A pause. Kara narrowed her eyes, then tapped on her tablet. He was right. Tom continued. And this logic flow here? He gestured again. It's too clean. Real life isn't that predictable. Build in some chaos or the system will crash the moment something goes off script. Peter bristled. And you know this from where exactly. Tom didn't raise his voice, just said war zones, where you build systems that can't afford to fail, or get someone killed. The room quieted. Marcus leaned back, impressed. Keep going. Over the next 3 hours, the energy shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the engineers started to lean in. Take notes. Ask Tom questions. Not out of courtesy, out of need. He didn't speak like a manager. He spoke like someone who'd lived the consequences of bad assumptions. And that made all the difference. At one point, Kara caught herself smiling as Tom and Lyle argued over sensor drift tolerances. Tom scrawling numbers on a whiteboard, Lyle firing back with logic. They looked like old colleagues, like they belonged. And maybe for the first time they did. As the meeting wrapped, Marcus stood and said, I want a working prototype by next week. Tom, you'll be lead consultant. Your word carries weight. Tom blinked. I appreciate that, but I'm not used to anyone listening. Marcus looked him in the eye. Then get used to it. Outside the room, as Tom packed up his notebook, Kara approached. You held your own in there. Tom gave a dry chuckle. You say that like I was a stranger. You were, she said gently, but not anymore. Then she added almost shyly, I've got a meeting with the board next week. They want a face for the project, and you want it to be mine, I want it to be ours. Tom considered that. And for once the silence didn't feel like exclusion. It felt like possibility. That night, Tom and Emily sat on the front porch, hot cocoa in their hands. She looked up from her sketch pad. Did they let you in today? Tom smiled. Yeah, they did. Did you say something cool? I said. Machines need a little chaos. Emily beamed. That's so you. He laughed. Then she held up a drawing, 2 figures standing inside a giant robot arm, blueprint style. One had curly hair, the other had tired eyes and a smile. "That's us," she said. "We build better together." Tom looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "Yeah, kiddo, we do." Tom hadn't worn a suit in over a decade, but that morning as Emily helped him fix the collar of a borrowed navy jacket, he looked every bit like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not because of the fabric, but because of the fire behind his eyes. "Do I look weird?" he asked, adjusting the sleeves awkwardly. Emily stood back inspecting him like a project she'd just completed. "You look like someone who finally remembered he's more than just what he does." He gave her a half-smile. "You get that from me." She nodded, "and from cartoons." At FutureMech's top floor, Kara stood in front of the glass elevator watching the skyline. The sun was rising in clean slats across the horizon. Tom stepped in beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said quietly, "You know, they're not going to make it easy in there." "I'm not here to make anything easy," he replied. "I'm here to make it right." She looked at him with new eyes. "You've changed." Tom shrugged. "I just stopped hiding." The elevator dinged open. Time to step into the lion's den. The boardroom was all angles and silence. 12 men and women sat behind a long glass table, eyes calculating. The walls were lined with framed patents, silver plaques, and digital displays tracking company metrics in real time. It was the kind of room designed to make people feel small. Tom didn't flinch. Marcus opened. "Today we're presenting the proposed redesign for our next-gen robotics line, and introducing the man whose insights made this pivot possible." One board member raised a hand. "And this man is," Kara answered, "Thomas Walker, former field engineer, current technical consultant, formerly janitor." A stir. Eyebrows raised. Another member, gray suit sharp tone, leaned forward. "So, we're now letting maintenance staff re-engineer flagship products." Tom didn't miss a beat. "No, sir. You're letting someone with field-tested intuition save you $100 million before your competitors eat you alive." A pause. Sharp. Echoing. Another member asked, "Where's your degree?" "Mr. Walker," Tom reached into his folder and pulled out a photo. It wasn't a diploma. It was a picture of a broken-down drone modified with hand-soldered parts parked beside a blown-out building in Kandahar. "I don't have a framed certificate," he said. "But I do have 12 men alive today because I knew how to think under fire." A woman near the end of the table looked at the photo for a long time. And now, Tom continued, voice firm but calm. "I'm telling you, the machines you're designing are beautiful, but they're not ready. Not until they're tested by hands that know what failure feels like. Not until someone listens to the rhythm of these systems, not just the readouts." He stepped forward. "You asked who I am. I'm the guy who rebuilt a system everyone else gave up on. Not just the robot. This company." Kara looked around the room. "You wanted results," he delivered. "Now you have a choice: bet on the boardroom. Or bet on the floor." Marcus added, "He's the reason Tesla extended our contract instead of walking." The woman who had studied the photo finally spoke. "Then let's make this simple." She turned to Tom. "Name the new line." The room blinked. Tom stood still. Then, slowly, he smiled. Back in the workshop, Tom stood beside the first prototype of the re-engineered modular robot. It wasn't polished yet, no chrome, no labels, just bare mechanics and perfect balance. The team had named it the Phoenix Arm, not just because it rose from the ashes, but because it had been reborn. Kara walked in holding a clipboard. "Guess what?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "They're pushing your design into beta ahead of schedule." He whistled. "That fast you moved the needle, Tom. You didn't just fix a glitch, you fixed a culture." He leaned back against the workbench, crossing his arms. "Funny thing about machines," he said. "They break when people stop listening." She smiled. "Same thing with people." He looked at her. Really looked. "Kara, I need to ask, why did you push for me?" She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bench beside him. because I remembered something my father once told me. He said, "The smartest voice in the room is usually the one not yelling to be heard." She turned to face him, and I realized I'd spent too long listening to echoes of my own voice. Tom nodded quiet. "I spent years thinking being invisible meant I didn't matter," he said. "Turns out I was just underestimated." Kara tilted her head, eyes softening. What changed that he looked at her, then at the workshop, then finally down the hall where Emily waited with her sketchbook and a peanut butter sandwich? "I did," he said. "I changed it." That evening, as snow fell lightly on the streets of Detroit, Tom and Emily walked home, their shadows long against the orange glow of street lamps. "You named it?" she asked, eyes wide. He nodded. "Phoenix Arm. Because it rises, because it remembers what it was before and comes back stronger." Emily smiled, then looked up at him. "Can I name something someday?" He squeezed her hand. "You already have. You named me." She tilted her head. "What do you mean you believed in me before anyone else did? That gave me a name no one ever gave me before." "What's that?" He looked at her with quiet pride. "Dad, the one who didn't give up." And in that moment, Tom Walker realized something simple, something profound. He had never needed a badge, a degree, or a title to prove his worth. He just needed someone to see him, and someone to remind him that sometimes rising again is the most human thing of all. It was never about the applause. Tom Walker sat alone in the corner of the Future Mech test facility, the hum of machinery echoing like distant thunder. The Phoenix Arm moved with precision, now almost too perfect, like it no longer needed the man who had rebuilt it from nothing. He watched it swing through a calibration cycle light glinting off its joints like something alive. But in his chest, an unexpected emptiness stirred. He had built machines, but he was still rebuilding himself. "Hey," Kara's voice cut through the hum. Tom turned to see her standing at the door, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. No clipboard, no badge, just her. "You okay?" she asked, handing him a cup. "I should be," Tom said, taking it. "Project's ahead of schedule. Tesla's locked in, and Marcus wants to name the next division after the Phoenix series." Kara sat beside him on the step, but he hesitated. "I still feel like the guy sweeping up after the parade." She looked at him long and hard. "You're not the janitor anymore, Tom." "Then why do I still feel like one beat of silence?" Then Kara said softly, "Maybe because no one ever told you what you're worth. So you started telling yourself the same lie." Tom stared at the floor. Her words hung in the air. Then he whispered, "When I was in Afghanistan, we used to build communications relays from scraps, tin, wire-broken drone parts. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Every night we'd send signals into the dark hoping someone heard us." Kara waited. He went on, voice low. "Sometimes, I think. I've been sending signals my whole life, just hoping someone would answer." She reached out, rested a hand on his. "Well," she said gently, "this is me answering." That afternoon, the company held a media walkthrough. Reporters, investors, a camera crew from Bloomberg. Tom stayed in the back as always, watching from the shadows. Kara stood at the front, polished and professional. And this she announced, gesturing to the Phoenix Arm, is the product of collective brilliance. But if there's one person who saw what others missed, it's him. She turned to Tom. "Mr. Thomas Walker, our lead technical consultant." All heads turned. Tom blinked. Someone started clapping. Then more, then all. He walked slowly to the front, unsure, until Kara whispered, "Say something. Anything." Tom stepped to the mic, and for the first time in his life, the world listened. "I've always believed machines are like people," he began. "They hide their flaws. They jam under pressure, and sometimes they just need someone to believe they can work again." He looked across the room. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't go to Stanford. I didn't wear a suit. I just listened to what others ignored." to what I almost ignored in myself. He paused. And if there's anything I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the invisible man sees the clearest. The room stood still, then applause like thunder cracking wide open. That evening, as the crowds cleared, Marcus found Tom in the hallway. "You've got a new title," Marcus said. "Officially, Senior Field Engineer. Comes with a raise and a bigger office." Tom smiled. "I kinda like the supply closet." Marcus chuckled. "You'll grow out of that." He started to walk off, then turned back. "Oh, and the board approved your proposal." "What proposal?" "The mentorship program. For floor workers. You called it, what was it again?" Tom shrugged. "Just an idea. Talent from the trenches." "Well, it's happening," Marcus said. "Starting next quarter." Tom blinked. Something shifted in him. Quiet, profound. Later that night, Tom stood in Emily's bedroom doorway. She was drawing again, her fingers smudged with pencil dust eyes, squinting under the glow of a bedside lamp. "What are you working on?" he asked. She held it up, a blueprint sketch of something with wheels, wings, and what looked like a toaster oven strapped to the back. "It's a flying sandwich machine," she said proudly. Tom laughed. "Practical. Miss Kara said I should start thinking like an inventor." He stepped into the room. She said that Emily nodded. She said, "I've got your brain." Tom sat on the edge of her bed. "You've got more than that, Em. You've got my heart, and that's the part I'm finally learning to use again." She yawned. "Does that mean you're happy now?" He kissed her forehead. "It means I'm becoming." Alone again in the quiet of the night, Tom sat by the window, notebook open. He wrote something he hadn't dared to write in years. Vision statement. T. Walker. And beneath it, the future doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the quiet hands that rebuild what others discard. He closed the notebook. This time, not to hide it, but to save it for tomorrow. Because for the first time in a long, long time, Tom Walker wasn't just surviving. He was seen. And, more than that, he was becoming someone worth remembering. It happened on a Wednesday. No warning. Just a cold email with the subject line reorganization plan. Immediate implementation. By noon, the Halcyon Room's access cards were revoked. The project was suspended under internal restructuring. Legal had stepped in. The server was locked down. Chloe's badge flashed red at the scanner. Lynn's files disappeared mid-backup. Greg stared blankly at the frozen interface like it had betrayed him. And Tom wasn't even told. He found out when his name vanished from the internal directory. That evening, the factory floor was dimmer than usual. The Phoenix prototype stood in the middle of the testing chamber, powered down. Lifeless, like a monument to something that once had a heartbeat. Tom stood before it in silence, arms folded, the weight in his chest heavier than any wrench he'd ever lifted. Kara stormed in her face, pale with fury. "They didn't even call me," she said, slamming her badge on the metal table. "Didn't even ask for a statement." "They never intended to," Tom said quietly. She stopped pacing. "How can you be so calm?" "Because panic doesn't fix systems. Listening does." She walked over, trembling. "Tom, they're shutting us out, scrapping everything. They're going to bury the whole line and sell the patent. You and we don't even exist in the announcement." Tom stared at the prototype. "So they're silencing the janitor again." "No," Kara said, shaking her head. "They're silencing the voice of reason." The next day, Marcus called them into a small corner office. He looked tired, beat down tired. Paper tired. "I tried," he said. "I fought for it. But corporate wants consolidation. They're merging departments, streamlining, cutting anything that doesn't scream profit in the next quarter." "And we don't scream loud enough," Tom said. Marcus nodded, ashamed. Kara leaned forward. "They're killing a product line that just saved this company." "They're not killing it," Marcus said. "They're selling it. To a lab in Oslo. Clean buyout, no names attached. No names." Tom's voice was low. So they take our work, our nights, our failures, our breakthroughs, and they walk away with the glory Marcus looked away. Tom stood. Tell me something, Marcus. At what point does silence become complicity? Marcus didn't answer, because he didn't have one. That night, Tom found Emily asleep on the couch, curled up next to her blueprint pad, a pencil still in her hand. She had drawn a new version of the Phoenix Arm Sleeker Sharper with a tiny label written in block letters, Walker Systems. He stared at the drawing for a long moment, then gently picked her up and carried her to bed. In the hallway, he paused by the mirror. His own reflection looked back at him not as a janitor, not as a consultant, but as a man standing at a crossroads. He whispered to himself, "They can turn off the lights, but they can't unmake the spark." The next morning, Kara found Tom in the warehouse disassembling parts from the secondary prototype. "What are you doing?" she asked, startled. He didn't look up. "Taking what's mine. You can't just—" "I'm not stealing. I'm rescuing." She stepped closer. "They'll come after you." "Then let them." Kara looked down at the pile of cable sensors' spare servos. "What's your plan?" He finally met her eyes. To start over, but this time not inside their walls. She swallowed. "You're really going to walk away from all this?" Tom's jaw tightened. "No, I'm going to build something better from it." Later that day, Kara walked into Marcus's office. Quiet, composed. "I'm leaving too," she said. He blinked. "Kara, don't. I already did," she replied. "You're not the only one who's tired of defending what's right after it's already gone." She placed a file folder on his desk. Inside, her resignation, and a business card with a simple name etched on it, Phoenix Foundry. R&D, Walker, Simmons. Marcus stared at it, stunned. "You're serious?" Kara gave him a half-smile. "We're not just serious, Marcus. We're awake." That weekend, in a rented garage on the east side of the city, the rebirth began. They painted the walls, white-scrubbed the concrete until it no longer smelled like oil and regret. Emily taped up her drawings. Lyle, the intern who once doubted everything, showed up unannounced with a backpack full of code and a notebook of dreams. And Tom picked up a wrench, turned it in his hand, and said, "This time we build for people. Not for shareholders, not for press, just for function and purpose." Kara looked around the space. "Do you think anyone will believe in us?" Tom smiled. "They don't need to, because we do." Outside, the city kept moving, corporate towers blinking with indifference, traffic humming in steady lines. But in that small garage, something louder was beginning. A hum not of machines, but of hope. And in that fragile flickering space, a man who used to mop floors was now sketching the future, with oil on his hands and fire in his chest. The garage lights flickered again. Third time that week. Tom climbed the rickety step stool and gave the fuse box a light tap the way one might wake a grumpy old man from a nap. The hum returned barely, but enough for the printer to keep whirring, for Kara to keep coding, for Emily to keep sketching mechanical arms with wings. Everything in the room was held together by duct tape, late nights, and sheer belief. But belief doesn't pay invoices, and belief doesn't protect you from silence. They'd pitched to 4 investors in 5 days. All no's, some polite, some brutal. "This is a hobby shop, not a tech company. You're too small to scale. A janitor and an ex-director. Cute story, but not bankable. And the worst, you missed your moment." That one hit Tom hardest, because for a second it felt true. He sat on the curb that night, hoodie pulled over his head, a lukewarm cup of coffee in his hands. Kara joined him quietly. She didn't say anything for a while, just sat beside him, like a partner, like a friend. He finally spoke. "I thought saving the company would mean something." "It did," she replied. "Then why does it feel like we're starting from less than zero?" She looked up at the stars, faint behind the haze. "Because we are. But starting from zero isn't the same as starting from nothing." He turned toward her. She added, "We have experience, grit, purpose, and something no one else has. What you? He gave a tired smile. And what exactly am I? You're the man who made machines feel human again. The next morning, Emily handed Tom a piece of paper, a crayon drawing her version of a flyer. At the top, in big, bold letters, it read, "Come see the future." Below it, in crooked handwriting, "Free demo." No tickets, just curiosity. He stared at it. "You want us to host a demo?" She nodded. "In our garage?" She nodded again, more determined this time. Kara peeked over his shoulder. "You know what? She's right." Tom blinked. "You're siding with a 7-year-old, I'm siding with vision. Yours, hers, ours." That Friday they cleared out the garage, strung up fairy lights from an old wedding rental, polished the Phoenix prototype until it gleamed like silver skin. Tom rewired the sensors himself. Kara fine-tuned the AI response algorithms. Lyle printed handouts. Emily made cookies. By 6 o'clock, a few neighbors came, then a retired engineer, then a high school robotics club, then 2 reporters from the local paper who had heard something weird was happening in a garage that smells like solder and cinnamon. Tom stood before the small crowd, hands a little shaky. He looked at Emily, who gave him a double thumbs up. Then he spoke. "Most of you don't know me, and that's fine. I spent years being invisible." He paused. "But machines don't care about resumes. They care about logic, precision, and most of all, intention. That's what we build here." He turned to the prototype. "Phoenix activate demo sequence." The arm came to life, moved fluidly, grasped a pencil and drew a perfect circle, lifted a delicate wine glass without cracking it, folded a piece of paper into a crane. Then it paused and handed the crane to Emily. The crowd clapped. But then the lights flickered, and with a snap, everything went dark. The Phoenix arm froze mid-motion, then slumped lifeless. Gasps, whispers. Someone dropped a cup, and in the silence, failure showed its teeth. Tom stood frozen. Kara rushed to the breaker. Nothing. The entire grid had gone down. He heard someone mutter, "Guess that's the end of that." Another voice looked promising, though. Tom felt it coming, that old feeling. Shame, doubt, collapse. He stared at the darkened machine. He could almost hear the voices of the past. "You're just a janitor. You're not supposed to be here. You missed your moment." But then Emily stepped forward, climbed onto the little demo platform, and spoke. "Sorry about the lights. But this machine, it's more than wires." She held up the origami crane. "My dad made this fly, not because of money, but because he cares." The room was quiet. She continued, her voice tiny but clear. "He listens to machines, but he listens to people more." And then she said the words that cracked Tom open. This wasn't a failure. It was a beginning. The power came back 5 minutes later. Too late for the demo, but not too late for the moment. Because what people remembered wasn't the blackout. It was her voice, his hands, their story. And later that night, Tom got an email. Subject line lunch. It was from a quiet man named Ellis Cheng, a former MIT professor turned investor. The body said only this: "I was in the back row tonight. I didn't come to see machines. I came to see you. Let's talk." Tom sat back, breath caught somewhere between laughter and disbelief. He turned to Kara, handed her the phone. She read the message, then looked at him. "You ready?" Tom smiled. Now he said, "I was born ready. I just forgot for a while." And with that, the lights in the garage glowed a little warmer, because belief, it had just found proof. The restaurant was quiet upscale, the kind of place where napkins were folded like swans and water was poured as if it cost more than the meal. Tom sat at the corner table, jeans clean but faded button-down shirt borrowed from Marcus collar still a little stiff. He looked around, nervously adjusting his sleeves, suddenly more uncomfortable than he ever felt with a wrench in hand. He was here to meet Ellis Cheng, and Ellis was late. Kara leaned in from across the table. "Breathe, Walker. You look like you're waiting for a firing squad." He smirked. "That's because every time I sit at a fancy table, it's usually to clean under it." She grinned, but her eyes didn't leave the entrance. Then the maitre d' appeared, walking briskly toward them with a small man in a gray wool coat and thin glasses. His steps were quiet, but his presence felt oddly weighty, like gravity bent slightly when he moved. Ellis Chang. He sat down with no fanfare, no handshake, just a simple, "Sorry for the delay. I needed to finish something properly." Tom blinked. "That's actually something I say about my work." Ellis looked up. "Then we're going to get along just fine." They didn't talk about money at first. They talked about failure. Ellis asked questions Tom wasn't used to hearing. Not what broke, but how did it teach you something you didn't know about yourself? Tom paused. "I used to think fixing things meant making them like new, but now I know sometimes fixing means accepting the crack and working with it." Ellis nodded. "That's not just engineering. That's life." Then Kara chimed in. "We're not building for profit first. We're building tools for people who don't have a voice at the table. We want a functionality to be democratic." Ellis's eyebrows rose slightly. "And if that means taking longer," he asked. Tom answered without hesitation. "Then it takes longer. Because when speed replaces care, people pay the price." Ellis studied him for a moment, then leaned back. "You weren't on anyone's list," he said. Tom looked confused. "What list?" "The one of names that usually get funding. Degrees, resumes, awards, accolades. But you," he tapped the table, "you feel like purpose. And that's rare." By the end of the lunch, Ellis stood up and slipped a small envelope onto the table. "No promises," he said, "just possibility." When they opened it later back at the garage, they found a handwritten note and a check. $2 million. Seed capital. No strings, just belief. At the bottom of the note, Ellis had written, "Not investing in a company, investing in a compass." Tom read it 3 times before his hands stopped shaking. Kara just whispered, "You were never on the list." "Because you were writing your own." The weeks that followed moved like a dream and fast forward. They expanded into a proper workspace. Kara negotiated a co-op lease in an industrial zone no one else wanted. Lyle onboarded 5 new interns from underfunded trade schools. Emily got her own workbench complete with mini safety goggles and a stool with her name painted on the side. And Tom, he built. With his own tools, with his own hands, with his own name on the blueprints. Then came the call from Future Mech. Marcus's voice on the other end was cautious, almost apologetic. "Tom, look, I know things didn't end clean, but there's something happening." "What kind of something?" Marcus hesitated. "The Oslo deal. It's falling apart. Their engineers can't replicate your work. They're offering to buy your patent back at a premium." Tom didn't even blink. "It's not for sale." Marcus sighed. "Tom, they're offering double your original salary. A lab, a research team." Tom shook his head. "I didn't build the Phoenix to be buried under corporate dust again. I built it to serve." A pause. "You're serious?" "I am," Tom said. "Tell them the janitor's not interested in rejoining the club. He's too busy cleaning up the future." A week later, they launched their first field pilot. Not in Silicon Valley, not at a trade show, but in a rehab center in Flint, Michigan, where veterans learned to use prosthetics and mechanics worked with injured welders on retraining. Tom knelt beside an older man with one arm and eyes full of steel. The man said, "This thing moves like it remembers me." Tom smiled, because it was built to understand failure and move with it. Later, as they packed up, Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, yeah, sweetheart. You remember that one time you said you were invisible?" "I do." She pointed to the mural the center had painted behind the Phoenix prototype. It showed a man in coveralls holding a tool in one hand and a child's hand in the other. The man's face wasn't fully painted, just a silhouette glowing softly. They made you visible, she whispered. He looked at it for a long time. Then he whispered back, No, Em. You did. That night, Tom stood in the new workspace. Quiet. Alone. The lights hummed. His name, Walker Systems, was etched on the door. And in his chest for the first time wasn't the ache of waiting to be chosen. It was the strength of someone who had chosen himself. Because in a world obsessed with credentials and spotlight, sometimes the greatest revolutions start with a man who wasn't on the list, a man who once cleaned floors, and now was building a foundation for others to stand on. A year later, the snow returned. But this time, it didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt like a memory coming home. The city had changed in subtle ways, more lights in the windows of old buildings, more strangers smiling at each other on subway stairs. And nestled between 2 rows of brick townhouses on a quiet midtown block stood Hearth Village. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a community. A greenhouse bloomed behind the main hall with winter herbs tucked under clear glass. A reading nook beside the fireplace now held stories in 3 languages. There were murals, handwritten signs, mismatched mugs stacked neatly in the cafe, and laughter rising from every corner like steam. And at the heart of it all was a small cottage tucked near the community garden with cinnamon on the windowsill and boots drying by the door. Inside, warmth wrapped around the walls like a hug. Ella stood in the kitchen slicing a spiced apple cake. The scent of nutmeg and vanilla swirled through the room. Jack stirred something rich and golden on the stove, humming softly one of those half-forgotten tunes he used to whistle when no one was listening. Emily padded into the room, her sketchbook hugged to her chest. "Smells like magic in here," she said. Jack smiled. "That's your mom's recipe, the one she left in the margin of that old cookbook with the coffee stains." Ella glanced at him surprised. "You kept that?" Jack nodded. "I kept everything. I just didn't know how to use it until now." They sat down to dinner at the long wooden table Jack had built with his own hands. Not perfect, but steady, like him. Over candles and mismatched silverware friends filtered in Kara, now teaching design at a community college. Lyle, wearing his first-ever tie for no reason at all. Mr. Gomez, who used to fix the boiler with Jack and now ran the maintenance training program for local youth. Everyone brought something, a story, a pie, a memory. Kara raised her glass. To second chances. And the people who teach us how to take them. Jack lifted his glass eyes a little wet. And to the ones who see us before we see ourselves. Later that night, Emily sat cross-legged in front of the fireplace coloring with a little boy from the shelter's new wing. Jack stood in the doorway, coat in hand, watching the snow dust the garden paths. Ella came up behind him, slipping her arms around his waist. "Cold out there," she murmured. He smiled. "Yeah, but not in here." She looked up at him. "Did you ever think this would be your life?" Jack shook his head slowly. "Not even in my best daydreams." Ella rested her chin on his shoulder. "You built something, Jack. Not just machines. A life. A whole new blueprint." He turned to her. "Funny thing is, the foundation was always there. I just needed the right people to believe in the cracks." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jack opened it to find an elderly woman wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a note. "Is this Hearth Village?" she asked, voice shaking. Jack smiled. "It is. Come in." He took her coat. Ella brought her tea. Emily gave up her seat by the fire without a word. As the woman sat, her eyes welled up. "I haven't been warm in 3 days." Jack knelt beside her. "You are now. And as long as we're here, you always will be." Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, something glowed brighter than any storm. That night, after everyone had gone, Jack stepped into his workshop, just a converted shed behind the cottage now. On the wall was a single photograph. A janitor's uniform hung beside a lab coat, underneath a plaque. "It's not about where you start. It's about who you build while you're building everything else." He traced the edges of the frame, then turned to his desk where Emily had left a new drawing. It wasn't of a machine this time. It was of their house, every window glowing, every face smiling, a garden blooming under the snow. At the top, she'd written, "The house my dad built with love, not blueprints." Jack sat down, picked up a pen, and in the margin of a fresh journal wrote, "Note to self. The world will try to measure you by titles, but the truth is, your worth lives in the lives you've touched, the love you've grown, and the home you've built where no one else saw one." He closed the journal, listened to the laughter echoing from the kitchen, and smiled, because once upon a time he was just a man pushing a mop. Now he was the architect of belonging, and somehow in a world that had once overlooked him entirely, he'd become the kind of man who turned silence into sanctuary. And every heart he touched was now part of the blueprint. Sometimes the world may not see your worth at first glance. Sometimes your name isn't on the list because you're meant to build a new one. This story isn't just about a janitor or a machine. It's about you, about the quiet strength we all carry, and the extraordinary things we can create when someone believes in us, especially when that someone is ourselves. If this story touched your heart, made you pause, or gave you hope, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear your thoughts, your reflections, or even your own stories of second chances and quiet resilience. And if you believe in stories that heal, uplift, and inspire, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful human journeys with the world. Thank you so much for watching. We're honored to have had a few minutes of your time today. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in the blueprint inside you.